what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great dialogue. This dialogue goes to our civilians out there because you were also given a position of authority. But the question for this dialogue is, does your position of authority have limits? And that's kind of what we're going to discuss right now. And it's going to be a great dialogue because obviously I have the custody perspective, but we also have our guest and famous author. She is the author of a book called The Cage Was Her Cocoon, and she is promoting love inside a world that's revolving or revolution or however you want to call it. It's just a beautiful shirt. But hey, Connie, thank you for coming on. Do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. So I am here for it. I think it's a very interesting conversation. We started probably yesterday. We started this conversation. And so who knows where the dialogue is going to take us. But, I thought it was really good for us to be able to kind of talk this through.
And love is spelled backwards on her shirt. It's not a trick in your mind. So I want everybody to know that. No one's gone dyslexic. That is RELO. See, what they did is they took love and they fit it into the revolution. Amazing work. I'm sorry, guys. It's Tuesday. Hey, so right, we actually had a dialogue for the other channel that we're a part of, Guardian RFID. We didn't know it was going to get to that point. And because it did, I wanted to kind of bring a part of that discussion back. And that's what's great about having the dialogue that me and Connie do, because we really never know where it's going. And then sometimes we find value that we want to go ahead and bring it back to whatever the venue is. So in this case here, it's coming from Guardian RFID. It's from our dialogue, and we're going to bring it to the Tier Talk venue. And I think it is a great topic. Now, guys, don't forget, guys, Tier Talk's for you, brave men and women that work in correction. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about authority with our civilians. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, so right off the bat, guys, thank you obviously for listening to our sponsors. Right off the bat, obviously civilians or non-uniformed staff, however you call them, they are in a position of authority over the inmate population. That means that the civilians or the non-uniformed staff are not going to custody to give out directives. The civilians are in that position of authority to give out directives. The question is, does that position of authority have limits? And when we talk about limitations, I think the limitations come across due to safety and security, knowing that custody is the failsafe. But at no point in time are we telling you that you don't have that initial presence of authority. Remember that. You enter in this profession as a civilian, as a non-uniformed staff member, you are given an initial perception of authority over that inmate population. So Connie, so real quick, do you feel that the civilian's authority is a little bit different than custody's authority?
So yes, I think so. Initially, civilians have authority over whatever's in their scope, right? So if I'm the doctor has the authority within the scope of his or her licensure to practice, to prescribe, to provide treatment, etc. I don't believe there's any time where a custody person could come into the medical space and tell the doctor how to care for a patient, inmate patient, however we refer to them. I think it's the same thing for nursing, mental health, dental, etc. I think, though, as it relates to directly supervising an inmate, our level of authority is much different, and the power dynamic between civilians and the inmates is very different. So I think because of that, that lends to the necessity of custody being involved in some of our engagements, particularly when they're escalating, or if you've given an inmate a direct order while they're sitting in your chair, or they're sitting, on the, the exam table. I think there's certain, times where if the inmate is just refusing to comply, that the civilian employee does need to take a pause and identify what custody support they're going to need at the time, because everything else outside of the inmate complying with the service that's being provided, I do not believe it's within the scope of the civilian employee to reinforce.
Yeah, and you actually, I want to explore something real quick because it's very important. In context of what you're saying, the scope does matter, because obviously we all have our responsibilities. So you're not going to see custody. I love that. Telemedical, this is how you got to do within that departmental policy, because that's not custody's really, that's not their say. That's not even administrative say. Everybody has those departmental policies that are strictly for the department. But I would like to say, because of the risk when it comes to reinforcing a directive, and again, because the inmate may not be compliant to that, and now making that second attempt could make the inmate more aggressive. Now the authority pushes over to that scope, that context that Connie mentioned, which leans towards safety and security. Do you think by going to that inmate now who's already non-compliant, because they have, listen, right off the bat, you have that authority. You give them a directive, it's ethical, whatever it is, they respond back in the affirmative. They don't have an option to even be passively non-compliant. They have to respect that order because that's your position of authority. So the moment you get the inmate, even if it's passively, not listening to that directive, the second approach could be a concern for your safety and security with dealing with that inmate. So now the authority, that reinforcement, has now pushed it into another scope, which goes directly to safety and security within the context of what custody does. So Connie, just to elaborate on that thought that you said, that the context of what you said with the scope, the safety and security from custody. So if you have an inmate that again is kind of being non-compliant, but not aggressive at first, but just non-compliant, could the civilian, in an effort to get that inmate to be compliant by maybe chasing after that inmate, even if the inmate's walking away, could that pose a risk to that civilian? Is that why you feel the reinforcement of the directive, just for universal precaution, should come from that safety and security side?
Absolutely. So I don't believe that there is ever a time where a civilian should be chasing after an inmate, because if in fact the inmate has chosen to end an encounter for whatever reason, even if you think that this inmate has taken something from your office space, you chasing that inmate is not, like, what are you going to do, right? Are you going to wrestle this inmate down for this thing that he may have taken? That's not your scope as a service provider or as a civilian in this space. What you can do is go to custody and say, hey, listen, I just had an encounter with this person. This is what he did, right? The safety and security side of things is the responsibility of custody. And I think that we have to be very clear on where that line is drawn in the sand, that, okay, my role was to provide this service. And now that it has sort of gone over into the safety and security side, I need to pull custody into the loop so that they can do their part. And really, that is a support, I believe, in my opinion, to us as civilians as we're providing services. Because I also feel that it sends the message to the inmates that we are working together. It isn't that, oh, I can do this thing and you can't do, you have no recourse as a civilian. No, my recourse as a civilian, if you aren't compliant, is that I can go to custody and say, hey, listen, here's the situation at hand. Now, I think sometimes civilians may think, oh, I shouldn't have to tell custody certain information, but sometimes you need to tell them that information in order for them to support whatever is going on in that particular interaction.
And Connie, we're exactly on the same page. I was getting ready to say something, and then when you went to elaborate, you went right into it. So again, I just want to further confirm a thought you said. It's very important that the inmates understand that custody is that fail-safe. They need to understand that dynamic because, again, if the inmates expect you to react to that as a civilian, they could be trapping you. You know, so I like what Connie said. They need to see that communication. They need to expect that working dynamic so they know for a fact that, you know, if I'm telling no, or if I'm not compliant with this civilian, then it is going to bring in custody. And maybe for the most part, they don't want to deal with that. You know, so I like the fact that Connie mentioned that you want to encourage that communication, encourage that dynamic to the point where the inmates expect it. Because the other thing here is that custody is the fail-safe. You know, I want you guys to be aware of that. Custody is the fail-safe, which means that the moment an inmate is even just an ounce or however small you can go non-compliant, then go ahead and go to custody and say, this is a concern. This is what I have going on, and I may need your help. And sometimes, believe it or not, the help may not be so much where custody has to verbally get involved. Sometimes just their presence, standing next to that civilian, you know, if they have time, because I know we have a lot of understaffed facilities, but if you're able to have that presence for a few minutes, it shows that dynamic, which I think lets the inmates know you're not alone. Regardless if you may be standing by yourself in the classroom, that doesn't mean that you're alone. Because at the time, I got my resources here, and I'm not afraid to use it. So I love what you said, Connie, about, you know, having the inmates have that expectation for that dynamic, that working relationship between custody and civilians. Now, when you were a civilian working in corrections, and guys, fail-safe, that's a term that has a lot of responsibility to it. So don't think that's a term that I'm utilizing that has no value. A fail-safe is the final defense. So it's a very powerful word. And by using that to define that level of custody, I want you guys to realize that that's their job. Their job is to make sure that they don't get past them. So at any time, you need to know that I can use that as a resource. That's my resource. That's the way that I'm protected, so I can do the job I got to do. But Connie, obviously, I'm sure you've had some inmates that have been non-compliant. You know, however aggressive or passive, was your routine automatically, I'm not going to entertain this inmate, I'm just going to go ahead and, you know, go to custody and let them help me with this concern?
Yeah, I mean, so as a provider, you do your best to find a solution to whatever the situation is that presents itself, right? Like if you can find that solution in the moment, great. And I mean, it's also that we're balancing that thought process that once I involve custody, that is an escalation, right? Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, like involving custody at any point in an encounter is considered an escalation, right? I don't think necessarily, because some people say, well, I'm going to call my direct supervisor. But your direct supervisor is a civilian as well. So the inmate being non-compliant with you isn't necessarily going to change because you involved your supervisor within your chain of command. I think that there is communication that needs to happen with your supervisor so that they're in the loop that this thing is happening, whatever this is. But I also feel like you cannot hesitate. So timing is another thing that you have to take into account. So when you're having these encounters and you're thinking about this situation isn't going as smooth as you thought it was going to go, the longer you take to involve custody, I think the longer you give the inmate time to think about whatever his or her next move is going to be. So for me, I was always of the thought process that if something is going on and it feels like I am no longer in control of the encounter, I have no problem ending the encounter or going to involve custody into this encounter, just so that it doesn't escalate to a point where I'm no longer safe.
Yeah, and guys, Connie said it again clearly. Your custody should be an immediate resource for you. Hopefully they are. They should be in those areas where you can call them directly, where the supervisor will be notified of the incident. They should be, even if there's a report needed. Because again, if you're a teacher and you're taking an inmate out of class, you're probably going to have to write a report on that anyway. Because again, education is a right. So now you are taking that inmate out of class, you're going to have to be able to justify that. So you definitely want to let your supervisor know, you want to document the issue, but your immediate resource, like Connie said, depending on the time, is custody. Now, and guys, I want to mention something here too. This is important. Okay. The thing here, sorry guys, I'm getting texts and I'm getting LinkedIn messages and I'm trying to, I'm OCD, so I get distracted easily. But what I want to mention too, guys, is that I mentioned at the very beginning that these are ethical directives. So in my mind, I understand that some people want to say, well, we have to understand why they're saying no. I get that, in an effort to, but if you're going back and this is a ethical directive, I don't believe the inmate should have the right to say no. It's an ethical directive. It's a directive that the inmate must be in compliance with. Okay. So again, if you're teaching a class and, in order to run things smooth, you're giving inmates some directive to, whatever the directive may be. I really do feel that, the inmate has to have that respect for the civilians. It's not like, okay, with the civilians, I can say yes or no, but with custody, I got to say yes all the time. No, I don't want you guys giving them that window, because I've seen it, guys. I've worked with civilians and custody, and in some cases, sometimes I could see that custody has that automatic level of authority. You could see it by how the inmates react. But then you get civilians sometimes that, inmates question that authority and they challenge it. And it becomes more difficult for the civilian to exert that authority. And to be honest with you, when I talked about initial authority, you both should start off, you and custody should start off with that same level of authority. Just like custody has a directive, ethical, I'm staying with ethical, and they get it. I give out the directive and the inmate says yes immediately and follows. I expect the same level of compliance between a civilian and an inmate on the initial level. I don't expect the civilian, because they're a civilian, to give out a directive and the inmate start questioning why and, whatever it is. I expect that inmate to be just as compliant with that initial directive. Now, Connie, are you in agreement with this, or are we on the same page? Because I saw something on the corner of my eye.
So I was in agreement, but the only thing I thought about immediately was like in the instance of medication and treatment. The inmates do have a right to refuse medication or treatment, but we do have to secure an actual refusal unless that inmate has like a conservator in place, or there's some sort of some other mental health order in place where they can't refuse. So I think that.
So remember, yes. Connie, though, we mentioned the context, the scope. Right. So we're kind of still within that. That's why even prior, and it's great. I understand where you're coming from. Even prior, I did say related to that safety and security. So I wanted to keep it, but right, within scope, I agree. There are going to be some things where, the inmate, like you said, per medical, they could say no. But again, that's within scope of that departmental policies. What I'm talking about are maybe directives that keep the orderly operations going. Yes.
So I fully agree then. I fully agree. I was just thinking like, okay, well, there might be a few times where they can refuse, but just so that we kind of put it out there for those who may be thinking, well, the inmate could refuse this or that or the third. Like, yes, there are some instances, but I think in the context that we talked about, no, there shouldn't be I'm just not doing it.
Well, let me just tell you the power of influence, because if you guys decide to rewatch this video, you can't see her, but I did catch a reaction from the corner of my eye, and you start to see my dialogue starts to slow down, because now I'm trying to think, what did I say that you didn't agree with? But now I'm keeping on the thought, because more of it is more of me trying to, I got to fucking win her approval now. You know what I mean? And then I was like, wait a second, let me just go back and Connie, I noticed something here. And then when you explained it, it makes total sense. It does. But again, that gives us a chance to reemphasize the fact that there are some scopes within policy where inmate may have the right to refuse. So what we're talking about here are directives that relate to orderly operations, safety and security. And I do expect that same level of initial authority from custody. I expect the same type of compliance to my civilian staff. And, you know, again, if you're giving out a directive that really does relate to safety and security and the orderly operations, I don't expect the inmates to question it from you because you're a civilian. And I've seen it, guys. So I'm talking from experience. I don't know if Connie has seen that. Do you see sometimes, again, nothing's 100%, but do you feel sometimes you could have some inmates that they think that they can question the authority of a civilian over the authority of custody?
Absolutely. I've heard inmates say, well, I don't have to listen to you. What I need to listen to you for? Like, I think, you know, there are times where we are going to be challenged as civilians. That's just a reality. But what I really appreciate are those times where custody kind of hears the exchange and they just step up and be like, why are you questioning her? You know, like I've had that experience many times. And, you know, the fact that we do have custody sort of reinforcing that authority and not undermining that authority is amazing, you know, but sometimes you do have those inmates who may not necessarily know the system, or who may just be testing you to see whether or not you are strong enough to not give over your authority, right? So like there's always the game that's being played. And I don't think this is a matter of ego, but it is, if you are the authority in that interaction, you can't give up your power in that interaction. And when you feel as though you're sort of losing that leverage, you as the individual have to take control of that again, because then every time you engage with that inmate, he's going to engage with you on a level that's not professional, or on a level where he's in control of the encounter, and you don't want that. It's kind of hard to get it back.
Right. And guys, if you look at what Connie's saying, the perception of authority, make it like it's tangible. Think about it as a ball. You know, so the moment the inmate begins to question your authority, you know, the ball's up in the air. Where's it going to go? Now, all because you decide to go to custody doesn't mean that you're giving your level of authority to custody. Actually, custody is now reinforcing your authority by their presence. You know, that's, I want you guys to look at it that way. You know, that what custody is going to do now is take the ball and give it right back to you by showing the population that we're in this together. You're not in a position to tell no to a civilian. And the reason why we're saying to go to custody is usually what happens for the most part is when you have an inmate that's being non-compliant, the assaults usually happen when it comes to reinforcing the directive that you're trying to get out. So again, you don't want to chase the inmate, or if you have an inmate that's coming at you aggressively saying no, why wait? Try to get to an area where you can get to custody or call something to protect yourself immediately. But I just want to make sure that you guys know the dialogue that we're having here is an effort to kind of remember the environment you're in. It's not personal. It's not personal. Don't go be chasing after this person because your pride. It's not. You're going to wind up getting yourself hurt and others. But I just want you guys to be mindful that custody is a resource, and there's nothing wrong with you going to custody to let them do what their job is, because that is their job. And I would say from the administrative level, I would think that's what's expected, because at any point, if we're reviewing those reports, I do want to see that. I do want to see that there was an attempt to go to custody and custody was able to step up, and maybe just their presence can de-escalate. Maybe. But what they can do that you may not be able to do, or you should not do, is they can get that inmate out of your area with whatever the force needs to be at that point to meet the level of force of the inmate. But remember that, guys. The end of the day is to keep the prison operating normal. You know, so if that inmate is a problem, then that inmate's got to go. And I will tell you another thing, guys. It sets an expectation for the other inmates. Let's not forget that. It shows the fact that it's zero tolerance and you will not negotiate your authority. And guys, that's what I mean by all this. Your authority cannot be negotiated as a civilian, as custody. And if ever there's a chance where you feel that, you know, you're losing out that bit of authority, call for the resource. Call for the resource and you will get it right back. I will guarantee you custody will do what they can to make sure that you don't lose that level of authority again. And we need that in this profession. Hey, Connie, anywhere else we have left to explore, or you think we covered it, or?
I think we covered it. I mean, when I think about it, I think that, you know, civilians, because we work in this space where there's this ambiguity, I think these kind of conversations help clear things up, right? Like, you know, what is the right time for me to get custody involved, and when is it not? I feel like one thing we have to be mindful of is that it's always appropriate to involve custody when we feel uncertain about an interaction. That doesn't mean that somehow your skills or your understanding is somehow diminished. It just means you know when you need help. And I just feel like we can't be afraid to reach out for help. Now, I think part of the hesitation sometimes that civilians may have is that they don't want the reaching out to help to result in a use of force. And I think we have to be able to let that go, right? We don't have control over the inmate's behavior. We only have control over our interactions with the inmate. And then when we do have to escalate, it is because the inmate's behavior wasn't appropriate. And if the inmate continues to escalate with custody, the end result of a possible incident or use of force is not because of you. And I think that's where some of the guilt comes into play. And civilians may hesitate to reach out because of what they think will happen in the end. And I think we have to think safety, right? Like, how do I make sure that I am safe? How do I make sure that my interactions with the inmates are always appropriate? And when they are out of control or out of my scope, that I put that sort of put the ball in someone else's court who can handle wherever this situation is escalating to.
And guys, just so you know, two things. These are the courses that Connie actually teaches at our Civilian Corrections Academy. So if you get a chance, do check out the website. And I don't want us to minimize the message of authority because Connie has a shirt that says revolution. What happened?
The oxymoron.
They focused on the love.
Of authority and revolution.
Yeah, I don't know if we planned that. But guys, in all seriousness, do check it out because I think this was a topic that was brought into discussion because Connie has that background and she realizes that a lot of civilians have gotten hurt because they have tried to chase after that authority. Authority, you don't need to chase after. It's there. It never leaves you. It never leaves you. Just know how to reinforce it. And how you reinforce it is by taking advantage of the resources. This topic, even though we joked and we had some fun and made some light, is probably one of the most serious discussions that we've ever had because the consequence of not listening to what we're saying could get you hurt. You know, literally could get you hurt, especially if you work in an understaffed facility. You know, you have to be very careful in how you deal with non-compliant inmates. I don't care if they're walking away, they're still a threat, you know, because at any moment they could just turn around, you know. So again, very important topic. I thought it was a great discussion. Guys, again, if you get a chance, please check out the Civilian Correction Academy. A lot of information offered there. We got the book, The Cages of Cocoon. I got my book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded. Couple of things coming our way, guys. I am going to be speaking at a college Thursday, criminal justice for Brookdale. Connie's going to come in a little bit, I think about a half an hour into the dialogue, because I know she has something going on. But we are involved. We are going to be presenting at the IAC, International Association for Correction Training Professionals in Arizona, but it's actually a virtual training. You don't have to go out to Arizona. So if you get a chance, please check out the website for IACTP, International Association for Correction Training Professionals. Daryl Smith is the one that's behind the event. He's one of the people organizing it. And he did organize for us a 3-hour panel discussion, which is highly interactive. Me, Connie, Soto, William Young, Russ Hamilton, Gary York. And we're making it, as I said, interactive. There are going to be some topics. You know, we're going to focus on some manipulation, bridging the gap between civilians and custody. That's always a good dialogue. Correctional leadership. You know, we're going to talk about that, kind of like the do's and don'ts. And again, the key here is it's gonna be interactive. So those are some of the topics, but we're expecting most of our discussion to come from the people that are in the platform inside Zoom to kind of see, and we're not afraid. Ask us anything. I got a panel that's pretty well versed, and I think there's a lot of topics that we could discuss that are personal to you, and that's the key. I want to tell you something about interactive discussions. Is that we're in a position right now where we don't want to assume you want to learn what we have to teach. So the best way to really connect to you is by having these interactive discussions so you can tell us. And then if there's something that we could offer, we're there. And here's the cool thing. Even if we don't know the answer, it happens. We're humble enough to know, hey, guys, we don't know how to answer that. So we're going to become smarter when we start researching that and then emailing you back, because that's what we do. We're not afraid to attack any issue, but we're also not afraid to admit that we don't know it. And it does happen, guys, because there's so many situations that could occur in corrections that there's not one person here that says that they have the answer for everything that they can face. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys out in Arizona. So I'll probably be mentioning that every time we do an episode, just to kind of start that movement. As always, guys, the show is Connie, did you do a closing?
I think I did. I don't think I have anything else to say. Other than, I think the last statement I made was a closing, but I guess in closing, I would just say that, as a civilian, yes, we have authority within our scope, within whatever our service provision is as we're in the environment. But I think there's a point where you have to know that something is beyond your scope. And if you don't react sort of quickly, sometimes you can get hurt. So, let's not continue to sort of cultivate this us versus them, right? Because it doesn't need to be us versus them. The more that we reach out and we partner with custody, I think it makes for a more smooth interaction with each other, as well as they get to read us a little bit, right? Like, oh, it looks like she needs help, right? It looks like this thing, and there's also that ability to really build trust, right? As you're continuing to work with them, you lean on them, they can lean on you. Sometimes, you see a situation evolving. I'm not saying as a civilian, you should just go insert yourself, right? But as we learn to work with each other in a more collaborative way and we respect each other's scope, sometimes custody may just reach into you because they know they've worked with you and you're good at this thing, whatever that is. So that's all I want to say in closing, is that we've got to be open to working with custody as much as they've got to be open to working with us.
Yeah, I think when inmates start to expect that dynamic, we have safer facilities.
Yep.
And isolate staff when they're communicating with each other. As always, guys, the channel is Tier Talk. Please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post up a video. Viva los correcciones, as Connie would say. But as always, guys, stay safe.